A virgin biker waited for his bride for hire, believing God had finally answered his prayer for love. But when the bus doors opened, it wasn't a woman stepping out. It was an obese teenage girl clutching a garbage bag and whispering, "They said you'd take me." Now this tough but gentle man of faith finds himself trapped in the most misunderstood act of kindness the town has ever seen. Whispers spread fast. The diner gossip, the online posts, turning one man's compassion into a storm of suspicion. He wanted a partner. Instead, he got a broken child who needed saving. And when the world turns against them both, their only defense is truth, and faith strong enough to stand alone. But as lies grow louder than love, can a man's pure heart survive a world that's lost its mercy? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The spring breeze carried the sweet scent of wildflowers across Jesse Rayburn's modest property as he worked methodically on his Harley-Davidson. His strong, calloused hands moved with gentle precision over the chrome, bringing out a mirror shine that reflected the early morning sunlight. The familiar notes of Amazing Grace drifted from an old radio perched on his workbench, its antenna held together with electrical tape. Mrs. Henderson from next door walked by with her little terrier, giving Jesse a friendly wave. "Beautiful morning for bike polishing, Jesse," she called out. "Yes, ma'am, it surely is," he replied with a warm smile, pausing to wipe his brow with the sleeve of his worn denim jacket. At 33 years old, Jesse cut an imposing figure, 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms strengthened by years of mechanical work. But his eyes held a gentleness that put people at ease, and the small cross pendant around his neck spoke of his deepest commitments. His home was a converted garage, simple but neat, with window boxes he'd built himself. They were empty now, waiting for someone who might know what to plant in them. Jesse had always been good at fixing things, but gardening remained a mystery. The nickname Saint Jesse had stuck ever since he joined the Road Saints, though it made him uncomfortable. He didn't feel particularly saintly, just a man trying his best to live right. His fellow bikers had given him the name after learning he'd never broken a law or compromised his values regarding relationships. In their world of reformed outlaws, his lifelong clean record stood out. Inside his home, evidence of his morning's preparations could be seen. Fresh sheets with crisp hospital corners adorned the spare bed. The kitchen counter held a large pot of his best chili, made from his mother's recipe, simmering slowly. A mason jar filled with purple and yellow wildflowers sat in the center of his small dining table, gathered from the meadow behind his property at dawn. Jesse's hands trembled slightly as he gave the Harley one final polish. Pastor Willis had told him about the Bride for Hire ministry last Sunday after service. "It's not a marriage program," the pastor had explained, "but a way to provide safe housing for women starting over. They need good Christian hosts who understand boundaries." The idea had struck Jesse like a bolt of lightning. He'd been praying for a wife for years, asking God to send someone he could care for and protect. While this program wasn't meant for matchmaking, something in his spirit told him to sign up. He'd spent the past week preparing, cleaning every corner of his modest home, fixing the squeaky screen door, and making sure everything was perfect. The bus would arrive at noon, bringing someone who needed a fresh start. Jesse didn't even know her name yet. Brother Caleb, his closest friend from the Road Saints, pulled up on his own rumbling Harley. "Getting everything spick and span for the mystery lady?" he asked with a grin, his beard unable to hide his wide smile. "Just trying to make things welcoming," Jesse replied, standing up and stretching his back. "You're the only man I know who'd polish his bike for a stranger," Caleb chuckled, but his eyes were kind. Most folks would just throw some sheets on a bed and call it done. Jesse shrugged. Mama always said anything worth doing is worth doing right. Caleb's expression grew serious. You know, some folks in town are already talking. Not everyone understands what you're doing here. I know, Jesse said quietly. But God knows my heart. That's what matters. The two men stood in comfortable silence as the morning sun climbed higher. Finally, Caleb clapped Jesse on the shoulder. Well, brother, I'd better get to work. But call if you need anything. The road saints stand behind you. After Caleb left, Jesse went inside to check on the chili one more time. The aroma filled the small space, reminding him of Sunday dinners from his childhood. His father had been a hard-drinking man who found God too late in life to repair their relationship. But his mother's cooking had always brought moments of peace to their table. The bus would arrive in less than an hour. Jesse's heart beat faster as he straightened a picture of Jesus on the wall and adjusted the wildflowers one last time. He'd never been good with words or grand gestures, but he knew how to offer safety and respect. He hoped that would be enough. Looking around his simple home, Jesse whispered a prayer. Lord, whoever you're sending, help me be what they need me to be. And if it's your will, he left the rest unspoken, but God knew the desire of his heart, the hope for a partner to share his life with, someone to love and protect, someone who would understand his faith and his calling to help others through the road saints. The distant sound of a bus engine made his pulse quicken. Jesse took one final look around, straightened his clean black t-shirt, and walked outside to wait. The morning sun felt warm on his face as gospel music continued to play softly from his radio, a reminder of the faith that had carried him this far. Mrs. Henderson was out in her yard again, pretending to water flowers while obviously curious about who might step off that bus. Other neighbors found reasons to be outside too, checking mail, sweeping porches, all stealing glances toward Jesse's house. In a small town, nothing went unnoticed. But Jesse stood tall and calm, his weathered Bible in his hands, ready to welcome whoever God was sending his way. The polished Harley gleamed in the sunlight beside him, a testament to his care and attention to detail. All he could do now was wait and trust that the Lord would guide what happened next. The white church van's squealing brakes pierced the quiet afternoon as it turned into Jesse's dusty driveway. His heart hammered against his ribs as he stood straight, Bible clutched in his work-worn hands. This was the moment he'd been preparing for all week. The van door creaked open, and Jesse's rehearsed welcome caught in his throat. Instead of the mature woman he'd expected, a young girl emerged, trembling like a leaf in autumn. She was severely overweight, dressed in clothes that seemed 3 sizes too big, clutching a black garbage bag to her chest as if it contained everything precious in her world. Her eyes darted everywhere, to the gleaming Harley, to the weathered garage home, to the curious neighbors pretending not to stare, before finally settling on Jesse. Fear clouded her face, mixed with a desperate kind of hope that made his heart ache. "You're Jesse?" Her voice quavered, barely above a whisper. "They told me you'd take me." Jesse stood frozen, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. The girl couldn't be more than 17 years old. This had to be some kind of mistake. "I'm Maggie," she continued, her knuckles white around the garbage bag. "Maggie Colson. My mother left me at the shelter." The words tumbled out fast, as if she feared he'd stop listening. The van driver, an elderly deacon Jesse recognized from First Baptist, was already climbing back into the driver's seat. "God bless," he called out cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to Jesse's confusion. "Wait," Jesse started to say, but the van was already pulling away, leaving him alone with this frightened teenager who looked ready to bolt at any sudden movement. "Please come inside," he managed, gesturing towards the door. His mind was racing, but years of dealing with scared folks at the Road Saints outreach events had taught him to keep his voice steady and movements slow. Maggie followed him into the house, her steps hesitant. The chili he'd prepared filled the air with a homey aroma, but neither of them seemed to notice. Jesse picked up his cell phone from the kitchen counter, dialing the Bride for Hire Ministries number with trembling fingers. "Please, hold on just a moment," he told Maggie gently, watching as she perched on the very edge of his worn sofa, still clutching her garbage bag like a shield. The coordinator, Mrs. Bedford, answered on the third ring. Jesse walked to the kitchen, speaking in low tones. "There seems to be a mistake. I was expecting—" He glanced at Maggie, lowering his voice further. "I was expecting an adult woman. They've sent me a teenage girl." Mrs. Bedford's sigh crackled through the phone. "I'm so sorry, Jesse. Mrs. Wilson, who was assigned to you, had a family emergency last night. Her sister's taken ill in Kansas City." She paused. "Maggie came to us this morning. Her situation, it's complicated. We had nowhere else to send her." "But surely there must be—" "Jesse," Mrs. Bedford's voice grew urgent. "Please, just for tonight. We'll find another placement tomorrow, I promise. But right now, that girl has nowhere else to go." Jesse closed his eyes, breathing deeply. He could feel the weight of Mrs. Henderson's stare through his kitchen window, could imagine the whispers already starting around town. A single man taking in a teenage girl. It went against everything he'd built his reputation on. But then he looked at Maggie, huddled on his couch, looking so lost and afraid. How many times had he prayed to be used by God? To help those in need? "Father, give me wisdom," he whispered, then spoke into the phone. "One night, Mrs. Bedford. But I need you working first thing tomorrow to find her proper placement." Relief flooded the coordinator's voice. "Thank you, Jesse. I knew we could count on you." After hanging up, Jesse stood in his kitchen for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. Finally, he filled 2 bowls with the chili he'd prepared, added a generous handful of shredded cheese to each, and carried them to the small dining table. "Are you hungry?" he asked Maggie. She nodded, but didn't move from the couch. "It's okay," he said softly. "Come eat while it's hot." Slowly, as if expecting to be told it was all a joke, Maggie made her way to the table. She sat down carefully in the sturdy wooden chair, her garbage bag now tucked between her feet. Jesse said grace quietly, noting how Maggie's head bowed automatically at the words, "Dear Lord." She'd had some exposure to faith then. That was something. They ate in silence, broken only by the clink of spoons against bowls. Jesse noticed how Maggie ate, small, careful bites, as if afraid of being judged for her appetite. He pretended not to watch, focusing instead on his own meal while his mind worked through practical matters. The spare room was ready, thank goodness. Fresh sheets, clean towels, even a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. He'd prepared it hoping to welcome a wife, but tonight it would shelter a scared young girl who needed safety more than romance. When the bowls were empty, Maggie stayed seated, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. Jesse recognized the posture of someone used to asking permission for everything. "Would you like to see your room?" Hasum asked. She nodded, standing quickly and retrieving her bag. Jesse led her down the short hallway, pushing open the door to the spare room. "Bathroom's right across the hall. There are clean towels under the sink if you'd like to shower." He pointed to the solid lock on the bedroom door. "This locks from the inside. You're safe here, Maggie. I promise." Tears welled in her eyes at those words, but she blinked them back. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotions she was trying hard to contain. "Get some rest," Jesse said kindly. "We'll figure everything out tomorrow." He turned to leave, but Maggie's voice stopped him. "Mr. Jesse? Just Jesse is fine." "Jesse." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry I'm not… I know you were expecting someone else. Someone better." The words hit Jesse like a physical blow, the self-loathing in her voice all too familiar from his own years of feeling unworthy. "Maggie," he said carefully, "God doesn't make mistakes. If you're here tonight, it's because you're exactly who's supposed to be here." She didn't look convinced, but some of the tension left her shoulders. "Good night," Jesse said softly, pulling the door closed. He waited in the hallway until he heard the lock click, then made his way back to the kitchen. The evening sun streamed through his windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, he could see Mrs. Henderson finally heading inside, no doubt bursting with news for her prayer circle. Jesse sank into his favorite chair, picked up his Bible, and began to read. Whatever tomorrow might bring, for tonight, he had been given a sacred trust, to provide safety for someone who desperately needed it. That would have to be enough. The sound of the shower running drifted from down the hall, and Jesse sent up another quiet prayer. "Lord, watch over that girl, and help me be worthy of her trust." The morning sun painted Jesse's kitchen in soft, golden light as he prepared a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast. He'd been up since 5 o'clock, his usual routine unchanged despite the unexpected guest sleeping down the hall. The coffee maker gurgled cheerfully, filling the small space with its rich aroma. He heard Maggie's door open, followed by quiet footsteps to the bathroom. When she finally emerged, she wore the same oversized clothes as yesterday, but her hair was neatly combed. "Morning," Jesse said, sliding a plate across the counter. "Hope you like eggs." "Thank you," she mumbled, taking the smallest bite possible. Jesse needed supplies, and sitting inside all day wouldn't help either of them. "I usually walk to Martha's general store on Thursday mornings. Would you like to come along?" Maggie's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Maybe I should stay here." "Fresh air might do us both good," Jesse said gently. "It's not far." Before Maggie could respond, Jesse's phone rang. It was Mrs. Bedford from the agency. "I'm still working on placement options," she said, sounding apologetic. "Everyone's full right now. Could you possibly…" Jesse glanced at Maggie, who was pushing eggs around her plate, trying not to look like she was listening. "She can stay," he said firmly, "until things settle." After hanging up, Jesse decided they needed to face the town sooner rather than later. They walked past Mel's Diner, where the morning crowd was in full swing. Through the window, Jesse caught snippets of conversation that made his jaw clench. "A teenage girl? Living with that biker? Whatever happened to Christian values? Somebody ought to call somebody." Maggie hunched her shoulders, making herself smaller. Jesse pretended not to notice, instead pointing out the old courthouse and sharing stories about the town's history. But when they passed Jenny Wilson, one of the diner waitresses, she quickly snapped a photo with her phone. Within an hour, the post appeared. The virgin biker and his runaway bride, with a slightly blurry photo of Jesse and Maggie walking down Main Street. The comments section filled rapidly with speculation and judgment. Back home, Jesse found Maggie in the kitchen, attempting to fix his leaky faucet with a wrench she'd found in a drawer. "Sorry," she said quickly, starting to put the tool down. "I just thought…" "No, go ahead," Jesse encouraged, genuinely curious. "You know about plumbing?" "Engines, mostly," she said, turning back to the faucet. "Dad taught me before." She didn't finish the sentence, but her hands moved confidently as she tightened the fitting. The leak stopped completely. "Your father was a mechanic?" Maggie nodded, wiping her hands on her jeans. "He could fix anything. Said I had the touch too, but..." She shrugged. "Mom's boyfriend said girls shouldn't play with tools." Jessie's heart ached at the defeat in her voice. "Well, those boyfriends were wrong. That's good work you did there." A tiny smile flickered across Maggie's face, gone so quickly Jessie almost missed it. That evening, Jessie reheated the leftover chili, adding fresh cornbread he'd picked up at the store. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by the distant sound of crickets starting their evening chorus. "I'm sorry about the gossip," Maggie said suddenly. "I can try to find somewhere else." "No," Jessie said firmly. "You're not the one who should be sorry, and you're welcome here as long as you need." He meant it, he realized. Despite the whispers, despite the awkwardness, something about this felt right. Like maybe God had a bigger plan than either of them could see yet. Maggie nodded, relief visible in the way her shoulders relaxed. "Thanks," she whispered, and helped herself to another piece of cornbread. Outside, the spring evening settled soft and purple over the town, bringing with it a peace that seemed to seep into the kitchen. Jessie watched as Maggie automatically gathered their dishes and began washing them, her movements careful but confident. Perhaps this unexpected arrangement wasn't a mistake after all. The phone rang again, probably more concerned church members or nosy neighbors, but Jessie let it go to voicemail. Right now, in this moment, what mattered was the safe space they'd created here, where a young girl could fix faucets without judgment and eat cornbread without shame. Looking at Maggie's slightly more relaxed posture as she dried the dishes, Jessie silently thanked God for bringing her here, regardless of what tomorrow might bring. Sometimes, he realized, the biggest blessings came in the most unexpected packages. From the living room, his old radio played softly, a gospel song about finding shelter in the storm. Jessie hummed along, watching as Maggie methodically arranged the clean dishes in the rack. For now, at least, they had found their own kind of shelter, right here in his humble kitchen. The days melted into one another like watercolors on paper. Jessie and Maggie fell into an easy rhythm around the small house, their initial awkwardness fading into something that felt almost natural. Sunday morning arrived bright and clear. Jessie stood in his pressed jeans and clean white shirt, waiting as Maggie emerged from her room in a borrowed dress from the church donation box. It hung loose on her frame, but she'd tied a belt around it to make it fit better. "Ready?" Jessie asked gently. Maggie nodded, though her fingers twisted nervously in the fabric. The drive to church was quiet, broken only by the rumble of Jessie's old pickup truck and the faint whisper of gospel music from the radio. As they walked into First Baptist, the whispers started immediately. Heads turned, and conversations stopped mid-sentence. Jessie felt Maggie shrink beside him, but he kept his head high, greeting people with his usual warm smile. They settled into a back pew, Maggie practically hiding behind her hymnal. Pastor Willis's sermon was about forgiveness, but Jessie couldn't help noticing how the man's eyes skipped over their corner of the sanctuary. After the service, while most people hurried past them with quick, uncomfortable nods, Mrs. Willis approached the congregation about cleaning the sanctuary. "We need volunteers for Tuesday," she announced, her voice carrying across the nearly empty church. To Jessie's surprise, Maggie's hand went up. "I can help," she said softly, but clearly. Mrs. Willis blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Oh, well, yes, thank you, Maggie. That would be helpful." On the drive home, Jessie noticed Maggie sitting a little straighter. "That was brave of you," he said. "I just want to help," she replied, looking out the window. Maybe if they see I'm not, you know. Jessie's heart ached at what she left unsaid. Over the next few days, something shifted in the congregation's attitude. Those who worked alongside Maggie during the cleaning day came away, speaking of her quiet diligence, her careful attention to detail. The whispers began to change tone. She's such a hard worker. Did you see how carefully she polished the communion plates? Maybe we were too quick to judge. At home, Jessie found unexpected joy in Maggie's growing comfort. One afternoon, he came back from running errands to find her in the garage, surrounded by parts from his old Harley project bike. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, scrambling to her feet. "I should have asked first." But Jessie was already grinning at the neat organization of the parts, the careful way she'd laid everything out. "You know what you're doing with all this?" For the first time since she'd arrived, Maggie's face lit up with a real smile. "Dad and I rebuilt his entire Kawasaki when I was 12, she said, pride creeping into her voice. "He said I had magic hands when it came to engines." Jessie pulled up a stool. "Show me?" For the next hour, Maggie explained each component with growing enthusiasm, her hands moving confidently among the parts. Jessie watched, amazed at how this scared, withdrawn girl transformed when talking about mechanics. That evening, Maggie announced she wanted to try making biscuits. "Mom never taught me," she admitted, "but I found a recipe online." The kitchen soon looked like a flour bomb had exploded. Maggie's face was streaked white, and even Jessie hadn't escaped the chaos. The biscuits came out lopsided and slightly burned on the bottom, but they laughed together as they slathered them with butter and honey. "Could be worse," Jessie chuckled, dunking one in his coffee. "Could be better," Maggie countered, but she was smiling. The letter arrived the next morning. Jessie read it twice, his face growing still. The church board's words were polite but firm. His membership was suspended due to inappropriate circumstances and potential appearance of impropriety. Maggie found him sitting at the kitchen table, the letter in front of him. "What's wrong?" "Nothing for you to worry about," he said, quickly folding the paper. But Maggie had already glimpsed enough. "It's because of me, isn't it? The church." "No," Jessie said firmly, meeting her eyes. "This isn't your fault. Some people they don't understand what they're seeing, and they're afraid of what they don't understand." That night, unable to sleep, Maggie crept to the kitchen for water. Jessie's voice drifted softly from his room, not singing this time, but praying. "Lord, I know you brought her here for a reason. Help me understand why. Help me be what she needs, what you need me to be. And Lord, help them see with your eyes, not their own." Maggie leaned against the wall, tears pricking at her eyes. "I'll make it right," she whispered to herself. Somehow. The sound of guitar strings being gently plucked filled the quiet house. Jessie was playing Amazing Grace, the notes soft and sweet in the darkness. Maggie sat on the kitchen floor, letting her tears fall silently as the familiar hymn wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Through her tears, she watched the moonlight painting, silver patterns on the linoleum floor, listening to Jessie's gentle playing in the next room. The music seemed to say what words couldn't, that despite everything, there was still grace here, still hope, still a chance for things to be made right. For the first time in her life, Maggie felt truly safe, truly seen, and that made her more determined than ever to prove to everyone else what Jessie had shown her from the start, that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most unexpected situations. The hymn drifted to its end, leaving only the sound of crickets and the distant whistle of a freight train. Maggie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and stood up. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to show the world what she already knew. That kindness could change everything. The letter from the agency arrived on a Tuesday morning, typed on crisp letterhead that seemed to mock them with its officiality. Jesse read it twice, his jaw tightening with each word. "They want to move me?" Maggie's voice cracked as she peered over his shoulder. "To Mountain Grove County?" 3 hours away, Jesse said quietly, setting the letter down on the kitchen table. "They say it's more appropriate placement." Maggie's hands trembled as she sank into a chair. "But I don't know anyone there. And the shelter there? I've heard stories." Jesse watched her face crumple, saw the fear creeping back into her eyes, the same fear she'd worn when she first stepped off that church van. His decision crystallized in that moment. "No," he said firmly. "You're not going." "But the agency. Sometimes doing what's right means standing up to broken systems." Jesse pulled out his phone. "I've got a better idea." 20 minutes later, they were bumping down an overgrown dirt road in Jesse's old pickup truck. Tall grass whispered against the undercarriage as they approached a weathered 2-story farmhouse. Paint peeled from its clapboard sides, and thick cobwebs draped the sagging porch like tattered lace. "My father's place," Jesse explained, killing the engine. "Been empty since he passed 3 years ago. Needs work, but—" "It's perfect," Maggie breathed, already climbing out of the truck. They spent that first day just clearing cobwebs and dust. Jesse showed Maggie how to test floorboards before stepping on them, and together they opened windows that hadn't seen fresh air in years. The house seemed to breathe with them, creaking and settling as sunshine poured through clean window panes. "The pump needs fixing," Jesse said, working the handle with no result. "But there's good water down there. Dad always said this was the sweetest well in 3 counties. Maggie watched intently as he dismantled the pump mechanism, explaining each part. When he handed her a wrench, she took to the task like she'd been fixing pumps all her life. By sunset, clear water was flowing. "Just like engines," she said proudly, washing grease from her hands. "Everything's got a rhythm to it if you listen right." The next few days fell into a pattern. They'd arrive early, work until dusk, then head back to town. Each day, the old house came more alive. Jesse patched the roof while Maggie scrubbed floors. They hung curtains salvaged from Jesse's garage, and Maggie arranged wildflowers in mason jars. "I want to try cooking something," Maggie announced one morning, setting up a camp stove in the cleaned kitchen. "Real cooking, not just heating things up." Jesse raised an eyebrow. "After the biscuit incident?" "That was practice," she said firmly. "I found Grandma Rayburn's cookbook in one of the boxes. Her cornbread recipe looks simple enough." It wasn't. The first batch came out black on the bottom and raw in the middle. They stood over the smoking cast iron skillet, trying not to laugh. "Maybe we should stick to sandwiches," Jesse suggested. "No way," Maggie said, already measuring ingredients for round 2. "Your grandmother wouldn't give up, and neither am I." The second batch was perfect, golden brown and fragrant. They ate it warm with honey, sitting on the porch steps as evening settled around them. Crickets tuned up in the tall grass, their song mixing with the soft rustle of leaves. "My daddy used to say grace before every meal," Maggie said suddenly, "even if it was just a gas station hot dog. Mom always rolled her eyes, but I liked it. Made everything feel special, you know?" Jesse nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Would you like to say grace now?" Maggie ducked her head, embarrassed. "I don't remember the words right." "There aren't any right words," Jesse said gently. "Just what's in your heart." As darkness gathered, Jesse began reading from his worn Bible. His voice carried across the porch, steady and clear. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Maggie tried to hide her tears, but they fell anyway, dropping silently onto her hands folded in her lap. No one had ever made her feel like she mattered before, like she was worth protecting, worth fighting for. Here, in this old house with its creaky floors and fresh curtains, she felt something she'd never known. She felt like family. The peace they'd found was shattered the next morning. Someone had spray-painted "Pervert Biker" across Jesse's fence in angry red letters. The paint was still wet when they discovered it, dripping like blood in the early light. Maggie's hands clenched into fists. "I won't let them do this," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "I won't let them turn something good into something ugly." Jesse stood quietly, studying the cruel words. Finally, he spoke. "Doing good's never been easy, Maggie. If it was, everyone would do it." "But it's not fair," she protested. "You're the best person I know. How can they think—" "People see what they expect to see," Jesse said. "Our job isn't to make them understand. Our job is to keep doing what's right, no matter what they say." They spent the morning scrubbing the fence, working side by side in silence. The paint was stubborn, but so were they. By noon, the words were gone, though a faint pink stain remained, like a scar that refused to fade completely. That evening, as they sat on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset paint the sky in gentle colors, Maggie spoke up. "I'm not going to Mountain Grove County," she said firmly, "or anywhere else. This is where I belong." Jesse smiled, a quiet pride in his eyes. "Then we'd better fix that loose shutter tomorrow. Can't have our home looking shabby." Our home. The words settled over Maggie like a warm blanket, chasing away the last shadows of doubt. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The mechanic's daughter and the virgin biker, making something beautiful out of broken pieces. The crickets sang their evening symphony, and a cool breeze carried the sweet scent of wild honeysuckle across the porch. In that moment, despite all the chaos and judgment swirling around them, peace filled the old farmhouse like a blessing. Spring melted into summer, and life at the old farmhouse found its own gentle rhythm. The morning sun would find Maggie in the cluttered workshop behind the house, surrounded by rusted tools and broken machines her father had left behind. She'd inherited his knack for bringing dead engines back to life. "Look what I found in the back corner," she called out one morning, dragging an ancient push mower into the light. "Just needs new spark plugs and a good cleaning, I bet." Jesse watched from the doorway, sipping his coffee. "You've got your daddy's eye for treasure in other folks' trash." It started small, fixing up old tools and selling them at the weekend flea market. A pressure washer here, a chainsaw there. Soon, word spread about the girl who could make anything run again. The pocket money wasn't much, but Maggie's pride in earning it honest made it feel like gold. "We should get you legal to ride," Jesse said one evening, watching her tinker with a carburetor. "Can't be a proper mechanic without knowing how it feels on the road." Maggie's eyes lit up. "Really? You'd teach me?" The next day, they drove to the DMV in Jesse's old pickup. Maggie clutched her study guide, muttering traffic rules under her breath. When she passed the written test for her learner's permit, Jesse treated her to ice cream at the local dairy bar. "First step toward freedom," he said, watching her savor every spoonful of rocky road. "But we're starting with the basics, safety first." The lessons began in the farmhouse driveway. Jesse taught her about proper gear, showing her how to check tire pressure and oil levels. He explained the physics of countersteering and the importance of scanning ahead. "Motorcycles aren't forgiving of mistakes," he'd say. "You've got to stay sharp, stay focused." Maggie soaked up every word, her natural mechanical intuition making her a quick study, Soon she could name every part of Jesse's Harley, understanding not just what each piece did, but how they worked together in harmony. Their biggest project arrived on a flatbed truck, a rusted 1985 Harley Sportster that Jesse had bought for a song from a friend's widow. Most people would have seen junk, but Maggie's eyes sparkled at the challenge. "She's beautiful," she whispered, running her hands over the corroded chrome. "Just needs some love." They worked on it together every evening after dinner, spread out on old blankets in the workshop. Jesse taught her the proper way to clean parts, the importance of patience in restoration. Maggie's small hands could reach places his couldn't, and her determination matched his own. "Hand me that 3/8 wrench?" she'd ask, already knowing which tool she needed. Jesse would smile, proud of how far she'd come from the scared girl who'd stepped off that church van. One warm evening, with fireflies dancing in the yard, they decided to celebrate their progress on the Sportster with a campfire. Jesse gathered wood, while Maggie dug out marshmallows and graham crackers from the pantry. The flames painted their faces gold as they roasted marshmallows on long sticks. Stars winked overhead, crickets providing their nightly symphony. In that gentle moment, something in Maggie's heart softened enough to let truth slip out. "My mom's boyfriends," she began, staring into the fire. "They used to say I was useless, too fat to be pretty, too stupid to amount to anything." Her voice cracked. "One of them, Rick, he'd make oinking noises when I walked by. Mom just laughed." Jesse's hands tightened on his stick, but his voice stayed gentle. "They were wrong, Maggie. Dead wrong." "Sometimes I still hear their voices in my head," she admitted, "telling me I'm nothing." "God doesn't make mistakes," Jesse said firmly. "He made you exactly as you are, smart, capable, stronger than you know. Those men, they were just afraid of what you could become." Maggie looked up at him, marshmallow forgotten. "You really believe that?" "I know it," he said. "Look at everything you've accomplished already. You're rebuilding engines, running your own little business, learning to ride. That's not nothing. That's something amazing." The fire crackled between them, sparks rising like prayers into the dark sky. Maggie felt something shift inside her chest, like a rusty gear finally breaking free. For the first time in years, she went to bed with a real smile on her face, hope burning brighter than any campfire. Neither of them noticed the car that idled at the end of the long driveway that night. They didn't see the camera flash in the darkness, or hear the quiet purr of an engine slipping away into the shadows. They were too caught up in their own small victory, in the peace they'd built piece by piece, like an engine coming back to life. In the workshop, the old Sportster gleamed in the moonlight, half restored but already beautiful, much like the girl who was learning to believe in herself again, one tool, one lesson, one kindness at a time. The night wrapped around the farmhouse like a blanket, crickets singing their endless lullaby. Inside, Maggie dreamed of open roads and endless possibilities, while Jesse sat on the porch, thanking God for sending him not the bride he'd expected, but the daughter he never knew he needed. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Jesse's phone buzzed with urgent messages. He stepped onto the farmhouse porch, coffee mug in hand, and felt his stomach drop as he opened the local news app. There, in bold letters that seemed to shout from the screen, was the headline, "Disgraced Biker Hides Teen Girl." The article beneath was worse, filled with innuendo and half-truths. Someone had taken photos of them working in the garage, twisted innocent moments into something sinister. Jesse's hands shook as he read, but it wasn't fear for himself. It was concern for Maggie. He found her already awake in the kitchen, staring at her own phone. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set in a determined line he'd come to recognize. "They don't know anything," she said before he could speak. "They don't know us. Jesse set his mug down carefully. We could leave town, find somewhere. No, Maggie's voice was firm. I'm done running, done hiding. She pulled out a crumpled flyer from her pocket, one she'd been keeping secret for days. There's a regional mechanic competition next month at the county fairgrounds. I want to enter. Jesse studied the paper. The competition was prestigious, drawing talented mechanics from 3 states. You sure about this? I'll enter under the name Saint, she said, a small smile playing at her corners of her mouth. Kind of like a tribute, you know? Jesse understood. It was her way of fighting back, of proving her worth not just to others, but to herself. Then we better start training. The old barn became their academy. Jesse cleared space, setting up workbenches and laying out his prized toolkit, the one his father had given him, each wrench and socket polished to perfection. Maggie spent hours there, learning the precise torque needed for each bolt, memorizing the intricate dance of engine assembly. The summer heat turned the barn into an oven, but Maggie never complained. She worked until sweat soaked her shirt, until her hands were stained with grease, and her muscles ached. Jesse would bring her ice-cold lemonade, watching with pride as she timed herself rebuilding carburetors again and again. You're getting faster, he'd say, as she shaved seconds off her time. Not fast enough, she'd reply, already reaching for another part to practice with. The weeks flew by in a blur of metal and determination. Maggie studied manuals late into the night, muttering specifications under her breath like prayers. Jesse caught her once, fast asleep at the kitchen table, a technical diagram serving as her pillow. Finally, competition day arrived. They left before dawn, Jesse's truck cutting through morning fog as they drove the 2 hours to the fairgrounds. Maggie clutched his toolkit to her chest like armor. The registration desk clerk raised an eyebrow at the name Saint, but handed over the contestant badge without comment. The other competitors, all men, most twice Maggie's age, barely glanced at her as she took her place at the workstation. The first challenge was basic diagnostics. Maggie's hands stayed steady as she worked, methodically checking systems while the judges watched. She passed easily, earning grudging nods from the other contestants. But it was the final round, carburetor rebuild, where she truly shone. As the starter whistle blew, Maggie's hands became a blur of precise movement. Each part found its place with perfect timing, each connection made with confident skill. The judges' stopwatches clicked in unison as she stepped back, finished a full minute ahead of her closest competitor. The rebuilt carburetor sat gleaming on her workbench, every component aligned with textbook precision. When they announced Saint as the winner, the fairground fell silent. Maggie stepped forward, removed her safety glasses, and faced the crowd. The gasps were audible. This teenager, this girl, had just outperformed some of the best mechanics in the region. Reporters materialized like moths to flame, microphones thrust toward her face. "How did you learn to do this?" they demanded. "Where did you train?" Maggie stood straight, her voice clear and strong. "I learned from a man who showed me how faith really works. He taught me that believing in yourself isn't enough. You have to put in the work, too. Every day, every hour, until you get it right." The drive home was quiet, but peaceful. The trophy sat between them on the truck's bench seat, catching the afternoon sun. Jessie could see Maggie smiling to herself, finally comfortable in her own skin. But when they pulled into the farmhouse driveway, reality was waiting. A stack of mail sat on the porch, dozens of letters from strangers who'd seen the competition coverage online. Messages of support, of encouragement, of admiration for her courage. And there, beneath them all, was a single envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Maggie's win, and 5 words scrawled in familiar handwriting. "Your mother wants you back." Maggie's hands trembled as she read the note, but her voice was steady. "She doesn't get to claim me now. Not after everything." Jessie placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, feeling the strength that had grown there over these months of work and trust. They stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of hope and warning. The late summer evening hung heavy with an approaching thunderstorm when headlights swept across the farmhouse windows. Jessie and Maggie were finishing dinner, a simple meal of meatloaf and potatoes they'd cooked together, when angry fists pounded on the front door. "Magdalene Marie Coulson, get out here right now!" The color drained from Maggie's face. "Mom," she whispered, dropping her fork with a clatter. Jessie rose slowly from the table, his calm demeanor masking the concern in his eyes. "Stay here," he said softly. But Maggie followed close behind as he opened the door. Tina Coulson stood on the porch, her bleached hair wild and her makeup smeared. She jabbed a finger at Jessie's chest. "So you're the one who's been keeping my baby girl?" Her words slurred slightly, and the smell of alcohol clung to her clothes. "Ma'am," Jessie began, "your daughter is safe." "Safe?" Tina's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Living alone with some biker? What kind of mother would I be if I let that continue?" She pushed past Jessie, her eyes locking onto Maggie. "Look at you, working on motorcycles, living in sin with this man. What's he done to you?" Maggie stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "He hasn't done anything except show me kindness, more than you ever did." "Kindness?" Tina spat the word. "He's brainwashed you, filled your head with this Christian nonsense. You're coming home with me right now." "This is my home," Maggie said, "and I'm not leaving." Tina's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" She lunged forward, but Jessie stepped between them. "Mrs. Coulson," he said quietly, "I think you should leave. Come back when you're sober, and we can talk properly." "Talk?" Tina's eyes narrowed. "Oh, we'll talk all right. We'll talk in court, where I'll tell them exactly what kind of man takes in teenage girls and keeps them isolated on some farm." She stumbled backward, pointing at both of them. "You haven't heard the last of this, not by a long shot." The screen door slammed behind her. Through the window, they watched her car weave down the dirt road, gravel spraying in its wake. Maggie stood frozen, her whole body shaking. Jessie gently guided her to sit down, bringing her a glass of water. "It's going to be okay," he said, though uncertainty clouded his voice. "She'll try to hurt you," Maggie whispered. "She always hurts the people I care about." That night, neither of them slept much. The promised storm finally broke around midnight, thunder rattling the windows as rain lashed against the house. Maggie sat in her room, clutching the Bible Jessie had given her, while he kept vigil in the kitchen, praying for guidance. The guidance came at dawn, but not in the way they'd hoped. 3 police cruisers pulled up to the farmhouse just as the sun was rising. Their red and blue lights cut through the morning mist like angry spirits. Jessie met them on the porch, his hands raised in peaceful surrender. "Jesse Rayburn?" The lead officer held up a warrant. "You're under arrest for corruption of a minor." "No!" Maggie burst through the door. "He didn't do anything wrong. Please, you can't take him!" But the officers were already reading Jesse his rights, securing his wrists behind his back with cold metal handcuffs. He kept his head high, his voice steady as he called to Maggie. "Stay strong. Keep faith. The truth will come out." "Jesse!" She tried to run to him, but a female officer held her back. "Jesse!" Her screams echoed across the empty fields as they led him away. The farmhouse fell into an eerie silence. The half-restored Harley sat abandoned in the barn, collecting dust like broken dreams. Social services placed Maggie in a temporary foster home across town, where she lay awake at night, listening to strangers breathe and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. The gossip spread through town like wildfire, each retelling more twisted than the last. I always knew there was something off about him, people whispered in the grocery store. All that religious talk, probably just a cover. Even some of his former church friends crossed the street to avoid talking about it. Days crawled by like years. Maggie learned through whispered conversations that Jesse's preliminary hearing was scheduled at the county courthouse. Her foster parents forbade her from attending, but she'd learned long ago how to move unseen when she needed to. The morning of the hearing, she slipped out before dawn, wearing Jesse's oversized Road Saints jacket and carrying his Bible close to her heart. She caught the early bus into town, her stomach churning with each mile. The courthouse loomed like a mountain of stone and judgment. Maggie slipped into the back of the courtroom just as proceedings began. Jesse sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller somehow in his orange jumpsuit, but his back was straight and his eyes clear. The prosecutor painted a damning picture. An older man living alone with a vulnerable teenager, isolated from society, teaching her to ride motorcycles and keeping her from her mother. Jesse's court-appointed lawyer seemed overwhelmed, shuffling papers and offering weak objections. When the judge spoke about holding Jesse for trial, suggesting months in jail while they gathered evidence, something inside Maggie broke. She couldn't watch this good man suffer for showing her kindness. She wouldn't. She fled the courthouse, tears blurring her vision. Back at the foster home, she packed her few belongings in the same trash bag she'd arrived with all those months ago. But this time, she added Jesse's Bible and a single sheet of paper. On it, she wrote in careful letters, "You gave me a home. Now I'll fight to give you yours back." She left the note on her neatly made bed, then slipped out the window and into the gathering dusk. The half-moon watched silently as a solitary figure walked down the empty highway, thumb out for a ride, determination driving each step. Behind her, the town gossips would soon have something new to talk about. The runaway girl, vanished like morning mist. But Maggie didn't care about their talk anymore. She had a mission now, and nothing would stop her from setting things right. The farmhouse stood empty that night, its windows dark except when lightning flashed across the sky. In his jail cell, Jesse knelt in prayer, his whispered words echoing against concrete walls. And somewhere on a dark road, a young woman carried their shared faith toward an uncertain dawn, believing that truth and love would eventually light the way home. The county jail's fluorescent lights never seemed to dim. Jesse Rayburn sat cross-legged on his narrow bunk, carefully turning a tiny screwdriver inside the back of an old transistor radio. His large hands, used to working on motorcycles, moved with surprising gentleness among the delicate components. "You sure you can fix it?" his cellmate, Marcus, asked from the bottom bunk. "That thing's been dead longer than I've been in here." Jesse smiled softly. Everything broken deserves a chance to work again. He adjusted another wire, and suddenly static crackled through the speaker. After a few more tweaks, clear music filled their small cell. Marcus whistled low. "Man, you really are some kind of saint." Every morning, Jesse knelt beside his bunk to pray. He prayed for Maggie's safety, for truth to prevail, and for the strength to face each day with grace. The other inmates stopped mocking his prayers after the first week, when they saw how he helped anyone who asked, sharing his commissary items and fixing whatever needed repair. "Lord," he whispered one morning, "keep her safe wherever she is. Help her know she's not alone." Miles away, in a busy garage across state lines, a young woman who now called herself Grace wiped grease from her hands and checked her phone. The latest video she'd posted had already reached 50,000 views. In it, she stood before a gleaming motorcycle engine, speaking with quiet determination. "People think mechanics is all about fixing broken things," she said to the camera. "But sometimes, the most important fixes aren't in the engines, they're in the heart. I learned that from a man who saw value in me when nobody else did. A man who's sitting in jail right now because he chose kindness over convenience." She'd been careful never to show her full face or mention names, but her story resonated. Each video gained more followers. The mechanic's daughter became her brand. She shared bits of wisdom learned in Jesse's garage, mixed with truth about second chances and faith in action. Comments poured in. "Keep fighting, Grace. Your story touched my heart. How can we help?" Sarah Chen, the journalist who'd covered Maggie's competition victory, recognized the voice behind the videos. She reached out privately, offering to help tell the full story. Together they crafted a campaign. Justice for the Virgin Biker. "Your competition win already has people questioning the narrative," Sarah explained over coffee. "Now we need to show them who Jesse really is." Maggie nodded, her confidence growing with each passing day. The scared girl who'd arrived at Jesse's door with a trash bag seemed like a lifetime ago. Now she stood straight, her skills proven, her voice finding its strength. The garage where she worked became her sanctuary. Her boss, an older woman named Rita, had hired her without asking too many questions, recognizing raw talent when she saw it. Under Rita's guidance, Maggie's skills flourished. She specialized in vintage motorcycles, thinking of Jesse with every repair. "You've got magic hands, Grace," Rita would say, watching her work. "And a good heart to match." The social media campaign gained momentum. Sarah's articles painted a picture of Jesse's life of service, his work with troubled youth, the countless times he'd helped stranded motorists, his reputation for absolute integrity. Former members of his motorcycle ministry came forward with stories of his kindness. Donations began trickling in through a legal defense fund Sarah helped establish. $10 here, $50 there, small amounts from people touched by the story. Then larger donations followed as motorcycle clubs across the country took notice. In his cell, Jesse remained unaware of these developments. He continued his daily routine. Prayer, work in the prison kitchen, fixing things for others. He read his Bible during quiet moments, the pages worn smooth from years of use. "Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor," he read one evening, the words bringing comfort in their familiar wisdom. His cellmate Marcus looked up from his own book. "Your girl still missing?" Jesse closed his Bible gently. "She's not my girl, Marcus. She's her own person, always was. I just tried to help her see that." "Well, whoever she is, she's sure stirring things up outside. Heard the guards talking about some videos going viral." Jesse's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his expression neutral. "Whatever she's doing, I pray she's safe." Meanwhile, Maggie was preparing her biggest move yet. She'd saved every dollar she could from her work at the garage, supplementing her income by selling restored vintage parts online. The defense fund had grown beyond anyone's expectations, but she wanted to do more. Working late into the night, she filmed her most personal video yet. This time, she showed her face. "My name is Margaret Coulson," she began, her voice steady. "And I'm the girl they say Jesse Rayburn corrupted. But the truth is, he saved my life by showing me my own worth. He taught me that faith isn't just words, it's actions. It's fixing what's broken and standing firm when the world misunderstands." She walked through the garage, touching tools similar to ones she'd first learned to use in Jesse's workshop. "Every skill I have, every bit of confidence I've found, grew from seeds he planted. not by force or manipulation, but through simple decency and patience. The video continued. As she worked on a motorcycle, her movements sure and practiced. They say he took advantage of me. The truth is, he gave me the greatest gift anyone can give. He showed me how to stand on my own 2 feet, and now I'm standing up for him. Sarah helped her edit the footage, adding documentation that proved Maggie's claims. They included statements from character witnesses, time-stamped photos from the competition, and evidence of Maggie's mother's neglect. As the video prepared to launch, Maggie stood in front of her small apartment mirror. She barely recognized herself, not because of any physical change, but because of the strength she saw in her own eyes. "You were right, Jessie," she whispered to her reflection. "God doesn't make mistakes, and neither did you when you opened your door that day." In his cell, Jessie finished another prayer, unaware that his faith in doing good was about to be vindicated. He'd fixed 3 radios that week, taught another inmate to read, and never once complained about his circumstances. The truth was coming, carried on the wings of technology and powered by the very skills he'd helped nurture in a scared young girl. Justice would arrive not with a roar, but with the quiet persistence of love proven true through action. Maggie looked at the post button on her screen, took a deep breath, and pressed down. The video began its journey into the world, carrying with it the power of truth and the evidence of lives transformed by simple kindness. The county courthouse buzzed with tension on the morning of Jessie's appeal. Reporters crowded the wooden benches, notebooks ready, and cameras poised. Judge Ruth Ann Merriman sat behind her elevated desk, her silver hair catching the morning light from tall windows. When the bailiff called Maggie's name, the room fell silent. She strode forward in her oil-stained blue mechanic's uniform, grease still visible under her fingernails. Her work boots echoed against the polished floor. Some people whispered. This wasn't typical courtroom attire. But Maggie held her head high, her face showing a quiet determination that hadn't been there months ago. "Please state your name for the record," Judge Merriman said, her voice gentle but firm. "Margaret Ann Coulson," Maggie answered clearly, her eyes meeting Jessie's across the room. He sat at the defendant's table, hands folded, wearing a borrowed suit that seemed too tight for his broad shoulders. "Tell us about your time with Mr. Rayburn," the judge prompted. Maggie took a deep breath. "The first night I arrived, I was terrified. But Jessie, Mr. Rayburn, he just made me soup and told me I was safe. Every single day after that, he showed me what real Christian love looks like." She pulled out a stack of photos from her pocket. "These are the projects we worked on together. See how he taught me to rebuild engines? Always keeping the garage door open so everyone could see. Never once did he make me feel uncomfortable or scared." The courtroom watched as she passed the pictures to the bailiff. "When my own mother's boyfriends called me worthless, Jessie taught me I had value. When the town gossiped, he showed me how to hold my head high. He prayed with me every night, not just empty words, but real prayers about becoming strong and independent." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "The only thing Jessie Rayburn is guilty of is being kind when others weren't." She produced letters from her other pocket, dozens of them. These are from people Jessie has helped over the years, the widow whose roof he fixed, the teenager whose motorcycle broke down at midnight, the homeless man he fed every Wednesday. In the gallery, Pastor Willis shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face red with shame. He'd been one of the first to condemn Jessie, and now each word from Maggie's testimony felt like a personal rebuke. Judge Merriman studied the evidence carefully, her experienced eyes noting the genuine emotion in the room. When she spoke, her voice carried both authority and compassion. "In light of this testimony and new evidence, I'm ordering Mr. Rayburn's immediate release pending further review." She looked directly at Jesse. "Sir, it seems this community owes you an apology." The room erupted in applause. Maggie ran to Jesse, throwing her arms around him in a tight hug. "See?" she whispered fiercely. "God never forgot you." Outside on the courthouse steps, surrounded by cheering supporters and flashing cameras, Jesse stood tall in the sunlight. Pastor Willis approached slowly, head bowed, unable to meet Jesse's eyes. The crowd grew quiet, watching this moment of reckoning between faith and judgment. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings as Jesse walked through the creaking farmhouse door for the first time since his release. Maggie had kept everything just as they'd left it, his favorite coffee mug still on the counter, their half-finished projects waiting patiently. "No working today," Maggie insisted, taking his jacket. "Doctor said you need rest after all that jail stress." Her tone was firm, but gentle, reminding Jesse of how much she'd grown. But rest wasn't in the cards for long. Within days, Maggie unveiled her vision, blueprints for Grace engines, sketched out on graph paper across the kitchen table. "It's a workshop for girls like me," she explained, her eyes bright with purpose. "Girls who need someone to believe in them." The old barn transformed quickly. Brother Caleb and the road saints roared in on their motorcycles, tools strapped to their bikes. They painted walls a cheerful blue, installed bright lights, and built smooth wooden ramps for beginner riders. The sound of hammers and gospel music filled the air. Donations poured in from across the country, tools, parts, and encouragement. Women who'd read about Jesse's case sent checks with notes saying, "For the girls who need a chance." Local. Businesses contributed equipment, and even some former critics showed up with work gloves and apologetic smiles. 3 months later, the first group of Grace Engines girls arrived. 5 teenagers from broken homes, their eyes holding the same scared look Maggie's once had. But Maggie stood tall now, teaching them about torque wrenches and self-worth in equal measure. As the sun painted the sky orange one evening, the purr of a motorcycle cut through the peaceful scene. Maggie appeared on her restored Harley, the product of countless hours of work, riding confidently across the field. She pulled up beside Jesse on the porch, her smile radiant with achievement. Jesse watched her dismount, remembering the frightened girl who'd arrived with just a trash bag of belongings. "You know something?" he said softly. "This is what God meant you to be all along, a light for others." The spring air buzzed with excitement at Mountain View Community College's graduation ceremony. Rows of black-robed graduates filled the outdoor amphitheater, but Jesse's eyes stayed fixed on one special figure. Maggie sat tall in her valedictorian's chair, her honors cords gleaming gold against her gown. Jesse adjusted his freshly polished leather jacket, the silver cross at his neck catching the morning light. Parents and families filled the bleachers around him, but he sat alone, his heart swelling with a pride deeper than any he'd known before. When they called Maggie's name for her speech, she approached the podium with confidence, so different from the trembling girl who'd stepped off that church van 2 years ago. Her voice carried strong across the crowd. "Most people expect their fairy tales to end with finding true love," she began, her eyes finding Jesse in the crowd. "But sometimes God writes a better story. 2 years ago, a man waited for his bride, but God sent him a daughter first." Her voice caught slightly. "That man taught me that family isn't always what we expect, but it's exactly what we need." The audience rose in a wave, their applause thundering across the campus. Tears glistened in Jesse's eyes as he stood with them, his hands clapping until they stung. After the ceremony, they mounted their motorcycles, his midnight black Harley and her cherry red restoration project. They rode together through the rolling Missouri hills, the late afternoon sun warming their backs. Wind whipped through their hair as they leaned into familiar curves. "Thank you, Lord," Jesse's voice carried on the breeze, "for second chances, for misunderstood blessings, for teaching me grace through this precious daughter you sent my way." They crested the final ridge together, their bikes silhouetted against the golden sunset. Two riders, father and daughter in all but blood, heading toward a future built not on romance, but on the purest kind of redemption. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.